Welcome, everyone. I'm Darcy Burns, Executive Director of Hill for Literacy, and we are excited to be launching this first speaker series webinar. At Hill for Literacy, we work, our mission is to advance literacy outcomes for pre-K to 12 students by equipping educators with the knowledge and skills to deliver high-quality, responsive literacy instruction that meets the unique needs of every child. We're a nonprofit organization in Massachusetts and have been around since 2001, providing in-person consulting along with technology-enabled consulting services. Again, aimed at increasing reading outcomes for all students. And we're very excited I'm thrilled to have Dr. Michael Coyne here from the University of Connecticut, NEAG School of Education. We have actually been in partnership in the state of Connecticut for 12 years, supporting literacy improvement in the schools throughout Connecticut. And so it's a very exciting partnership, and we look forward to everyone hearing all the great things that are happening. So welcome, Dr. Coyne.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. And to further introduce Dr. Coyne, Dr. Michael Coyne is a professor of special education in the NEAG School of Education at the University of Connecticut. He's also the head of the Department of Educational Psychology. His research focuses on early literacy and beginning reading instruction and intervention, as well as multi-tiered systems of support, school-based experimental research, and effective practices for students with learning disabilities, including dyslexia. Dr. Coyne has directed multiple grants and contracts funded by the U.S. Department of Education and is currently a principal investigator of the National Research Network on Integrated MTSS. He's worked with state departments of education to develop, implement, and evaluate statewide MTSS efforts and federal reading initiatives. And Dr. Coyne is a formal special educator in the public schools. So as we get ready, I just want our audience to know that we will be answering your questions at the end of the presentation and after a short moderated Q&A. So please do feel free to put all of your questions into the Q&A box on the right of your screen at any time during today's presentation, and we'll make sure to get to as many as possible. Thank you, Dr. Coyne.
So it's really, it's so great to be here with you all this afternoon, and really want to thank Darcy and Stephanie for inviting me to be a part of this webinar, and for everyone at Hill for Literacy for sponsoring this, and for all the great work that folks have done at the Hill supporting literacy over the years. So I'm going to be talking with you today about the power of partnerships, working together to improve literacy. And so the goals for the webinar are to describe how partnerships can improve student literacy outcomes. And I want to talk about partnerships at a macro level, so partnerships at the state level, but also talking about partnerships at the local level, so the school or district level. And I also want to use Connecticut's literacy model as an example of successful partnerships, and highlighting how it supports student literacy achievement within an MTSS framework. So I'm particularly excited to talking with you today about the Connecticut literacy model because, personally, my involvement in this initiative has been one of the most meaningful and rewarding and important professional activities that I've had the opportunity to be a part of. And I really believe that Connecticut's work and investment over the years to improving reading outcomes and closing the reading opportunity gap has been among the most serious, comprehensive, and forward-thinking of any state. So again, it's just really great to get a chance to talk with you all about it, and really looking forward to the conversation and questions at the end of the presentation also. So what is the story of Connecticut's literacy model? Well, first, it's a story that spans, like Darcy said, over 12 years. And I think that alone makes it unusual compared to many other educational initiatives, which seem to kind of, come and go every few years or so. But this one has really been able to sustain over time. It's also unusual in that it's followed a pretty distinctive developmental trajectory, and its focus over the years have changed and evolved. So it started with a pilot with 4 schools across 4 districts in Connecticut. And the goal of this pilot was to rigorously evaluate and document the efficacy and the effectiveness of this MTSS model, and really kind of determining, whether this works or not. And to give it away, it does work. And so having that evidence of efficacy really provided strong justification for the state to continue to invest in this work, and also to work on scaling up and expansion. So the focus kind of shifted to, not just an initiative at this point, but a validated model. And so the idea was to really focus the shift from asking about whether the model works to really thinking about building the tools and the routines and the systems to facilitate implementation, as well as identifying challenges and barriers to implementation as well. And also to scale up and expand and provide support to more schools and districts across Connecticut, particularly in alliance districts. And then, in a real testament to Connecticut's long-term commitment to reading and the acknowledgement of the success of this model, then the focus shifted to sustainability. And one of the real, sort of key points in the sustainability focus was the establishment of Connecticut's Center for Literacy Research and Reading Success within the Connecticut State Department of Education. And, this really kind of highlighted and focused on establishing and institutionalizing state capacity to support schools working with this, over time, and really a commitment to sustaining this for the long time. So this was a pretty interesting story, and I'm going to come back to kind of going into detail a little bit more about these different phases of Connecticut's literacy model. But I want to focus in on what made all of this possible, and that's the collaborative partnership that's the center of all of this. So here are the sort of partners that have made this Connecticut literacy model work, or Connecticut Literacy Initiative work. And so what's really cool, I think, is that each of these partners brings something unique and important to the work, and has been integral to the success and the sustainability of this work. And I also think it's an example that illustrates how successful partnerships at the state level can really make a difference. So I want to talk about a little bit of what each of these partners brings to this partnership. So state legislatures, really kind of have the vision and the political will to champion and invest in improving literacy outcomes. And in Connecticut, this partnership has really been anchored by the vision and the leadership of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus of the Connecticut General Assembly, and especially Senator Pat Miller, who continues to be the champion of this work and has contributed so much to this effort. And the caucus has provided the leadership through a series of legislative acts and bills over the years that has continue to center literacy success for all students, and has provided continued funding for this work. This work at the sort of legislative level has also been supported by a coalition of Connecticut groups and individuals who, have really helped us all keep our eye on the ball and have been tireless advocates and catalysts. These are folks that include Stephen Hernandez and Hamish McPhail at CONCAN, Amy Dowell and Nikki Golos leading the Right to Read Connecticut Coalition, and of course, Margie Gillis at Literacy How, who's been, a leader and a visionary around literacy in Connecticut for years. State departments of education also have a really important role in these kind of partnerships. They provide statewide leadership. They also are the mechanism that has the ability to enact legislation and communicate priorities, allocate funding, and mobilize resources. And in Connecticut, the Connecticut Department of Education has been really diligent in their support and have worked continuously to enact the legislation that informs the Connecticut Literacy Initiative and literacy model. This work has been supported by a number of commissioners in the state, and including currently the unwavering support of Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker. And really the constants at the Connecticut Department of Education over the years have been Dr. Melissa Hickey, who is Connecticut's is the Connecticut's Director of Reading and Literacy, and also the head of Connecticut Center for Reading Research and Literacy Success. Also, Dr. Joanne White, Connecticut's long-term expert literacy consultant. And more recently, there's been a team of amazing new consultants who have brought a wealth of expertise and experience and dedication to this partnership. Institutes of higher education also bring something to this partnership. A lot of times faculty in colleges and universities are experts that are familiar with the science of reading and current research. Folks at universities also have the ability to design, conduct, and disseminate evaluations of literacy initiatives. And so, again, I feel really lucky to be from the NEAG School of Education at UCONN and have been able to be a part of this, really help with evaluating and conducting research studies, and then being able to disseminate results, being able to write papers and present back to the legislature and to different communities in Connecticut, but also to share the work that's happened in Connecticut across the country, being able to present at conferences and speak to other practitioners and policymakers across the country about the really good work that's been going on in Connecticut. And finally, literacy partners. Literacy partners can provide this sort of really on-the-ground professional development and technical assistance. These are folks that have deep experience and knowledge of effective literacy practices and systems, how schools work, and what teachers need. Oftentimes, state departments of education don't have the capacity to provide the extensive technical assistance and professional development that are associated with these large literacy initiatives. So, for the Connecticut example, Hill for Literacy and Literacy How are able to step in and really provide that on-the-ground support to teachers in schools. The folks at Hill didn't ask me to do this, but I kind of think, in some sense, in this particular initiative and in general, that it is sort of the literacy partners that are that active ingredient or the secret sauce or the connective tissue that really pulls these things together. And I think it's because the experience of really understanding how schools work, what teachers need, how to get these things in place and how to sustain them over time. So I've learned so much from being able to partner with folks like Darcy and Stephanie at the Hill and Margie at Literacy How. So this is the partnership that really was responsible throughout all of these phases of Connecticut's literacy model. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of how this moved across these different phases. But first, to start off, what is Connecticut's literacy model? What are we talking about here? And I think these are the essential components of the model. And I think one of the most important things is that it's not a program or a product. Instead, Connecticut's literacy model is a framework of effective and validated practices for teaching and assessing reading. So the components include things like identifying reading as a school's top priority and developing a comprehensive school-wide or district-wide reading improvement plan, ensuring that there is strong distributed literacy leadership at the district and school level, and at the school level that starts with the principal and includes a representative school leadership team. And again, these are the kind of local partnerships that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later in the talk. Identifying assessments that let teachers know if their instruction is working and if students are learning, delivering high quality classroom reading instruction, informed by a science of reading to all students in all classrooms, providing intensive evidence-based supplemental reading interventions for students that need extra support, supporting teachers through ongoing coaching and targeted professional development that is nimble and responsive to their needs. And finally, nurturing strong family engagement so that families feel empowered to be equal partners in reading success. Now, if this is all sounding a little bit like MTSS to you, you're right. Has anybody seen this triangle before? This is our newfangled way for talking about MTSS. But really, kind of what this shows is that none of these practices are new or different, right? We know that these essential elements are what it takes to change reading outcomes. However, much of the research on the practices and systems that are part of MTSS have been through highly controlled research studies implemented by researchers under ideal conditions. But what the partnership wanted to do, particularly in this pilot phase, was to see if these combinations of practices, this framework, could work in real schools with real teachers and with real kids. And in particular, would this work in Connecticut schools? Could this work in Connecticut schools? So in this pilot time, we really tried to be able to conduct some studies to answer these questions of could this work in Connecticut? And so this is actually a recent article that has come out, and it talks about the pilot focused on kind of the tier 1 component of the model. So again, we were working with 4 elementary schools in 4 different districts. A high percentage of these students were eligible for free and reduced lunch, and you can see that it was a pretty diverse student population. And what we did is we looked at the school's student outcomes before kind of coming in and supporting this literacy model, and then with 2 years of implementation of CK3LI, or the Connecticut literacy model. And what we looked at is a composite measure that we created of different literacy outcomes combined into a composite measure that is taken from DIBELS. And so what we found is this is year 1. So we're using that as a baseline and looking to see kind of differences in literacy achievement at the end of each school year in each grade over these next 2 years. And here's the changes in student outcomes at the end of the year after the first year of implementation of the literacy model. And here is the outcomes at the end of each grade level after 2 years participating in the literacy outcome. And for those of you that are interested in effect sizes, these are meaningful effect sizes. So we were able to demonstrate through this study that the tier 1 component of the Connecticut literacy model really resulted in improved reading outcomes over multiple years. We were also able to evaluate the effects of the tier 2 component of the literacy model. And these were for students in grades 1 through 3 that received supplemental tier 2 intervention. We used a regression discontinuity design. What we found here also was meaningful gains in foundational skills, phonemic awareness and decoding, for those students who were at risk for reading difficulties or experiencing reading difficulties above what they would be getting if they were if they were not getting tier 2 intervention. So what we found in this pilot phase is that Connecticut's literacy model works. The outcome data consistently showed that students experience greater growth in early literacy skills across grades and across measures when their school implemented Connecticut's literacy model. And these benefits continued to increase over time. And what was really exciting for me as a researcher is we were able to demonstrate effects that were similar to those found in these highly controlled research studies, but we were able to do it in real schools here in Connecticut. Well, here in Connecticut, I'm here in Connecticut, but in Connecticut. And we didn't just have descriptive or correlational data either. We were able to use rigorous research designs that really allowed us to attribute changes in student reading outcomes and reading achievement directly to schools implementing the Connecticut literacy model. And this is important because these studies meet standards for rigor and effectiveness required by the Every Student Succeeds Act. So in my experience, and something that's really exciting to me as a researcher, is that it's extremely rare for a state to have such robust and rigorous research data on the effectiveness of a state initiative. And in fact, other states across the country have looked to our research evidence on the Connecticut reading model, Connecticut literacy model, to inform the development of their own statewide reading improvement efforts. So again, this kind of evidence that we got from the pilot really provided that sort of really strong justification for why we should be expanding and scaling up this to other schools and other districts. And so we were able to move into that phase. And again, this phase really sort of focused more on implementation. So this sort of shows the scale and expansion. Back in 2013, we were in 4 schools and 4 districts. And then over the years in between, I'm sure that we've worked with at least 100 schools in at least 20 districts in Connecticut. And given the sort of Right to Read professional development series, it's probably more than that as well. So it really kind of shows this time of the initiative where things were really expanding and reaching out to more and more districts and schools. And like I said, this was also a time when we were able to really look at what facilitates implementation? Like, how do we help schools do this with fidelity and with integrity in their own local contexts? So we're able to really look at this systematically and publish some papers related to how to implement, challenges to implementation, facilitators to implementation. And I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about some of these challenges and barriers in a few minutes. Oops. Whoa. Okay. And then finally, when we're talking about sustainability, in fairly recent legislation, established the Connecticut Center for Literacy Research and Reading Success. And this really institutionalized and highlighted the state's goal to really build capacity to maintain this work. And so, we now have the Connecticut Center for Literacy Research and Reading Success with Melissa Hickey as the director and a number of educational consultants that are really supporting this work at the state level. This has also resulted in a lot of resources for the state. Now the Connecticut K-3 literacy model is now codified into the Connecticut's K-3 literacy strategy, which provides guidance on what this looks like to schools across the state. The center has also been able to leverage additional funding and different legislation to be able to support schools and districts across the state, particularly through Connecticut's Right to Read bill. So this is just some examples where the center was able to facilitate providing these ARPA Right to Read grants to schools and districts across the state. Also the professional learning series around leadership and science of reading, again, coordinated through the center and continuing to leverage the expertise of the different partners that are involved in this work. So that's a kind of overview of the kind of state level partnership and the story of the Connecticut Literacy Initiative or Reading Model. But I also want to kind of now change the focus a little bit to the local level, because these partnerships at the district and school level are just as important in ensuring success of this. And so we can think of these type of partnerships too. And again, this is one of those places where our literacy partners like Hill really kind of connect the partnership at the state level to the partnerships at the local level, right? That are able to kind of work across both of these to facilitate this work happening. So one of the things that's sort of helpful to think about how this works at the local level is to think a little bit about what we mean or how we think about teaching reading. So Louisa Moats a while ago had this famous quote that talks about how teaching reading is rocket science. And I think this is really important. And this has really communicated to the field and to the public that, there is a science of reading out there, and the individual teachers really need to be aware of the science of reading to be expert teachers of reading. That individual teachers need to know about the different areas of reading. They need to know about instructional strategies. They need to know about how to make decisions based on data for their students. But I think the more that we've learned about reading development, reading difficulties, how to teach reading, I think we've realized more and more how complicated and complex it really is. And I think we're realizing more and more that it really is unrealistic to expect individual teachers working independently to be able to, deliver the whole host of evidence-based practices that we know are necessary to change reading trajectories over time. So another way that I like to think about it is not just that teaching reading is rocket science, but that teaching reading really is mission control. And in a sense, this kind of broadens the scope from individual teachers to these kind of local partnerships that need to work together to support reading. And when we think more about teaching reading as mission control, it helps us to think about things like implementation science, systems and structures like teaming and professional development and coaching, school-wide planning and scheduling, coordination and alignment of instructional materials, assessments and supports, and also school-wide database decision-making. So again, when we kind of come back to these essential components, these are all these things. To make these things happen in schools and in districts takes a team, right? Takes a team and a partnership of people to be able to come together and think about teaching reading as a partnership rather than as an individual teacher. So when we started this initiative a long time ago, I really thought I was an expert, and I thought like, oh, I don't just even have surface knowledge about this. I have a real deep knowledge of how to help schools do this. Well, it didn't take that long for me to realize that I was wrong, that there's layers and layers that go deeper than I ever thought. And working with Hill and Literacy How, I learned how important it is to really understand and get down into the details and really see how these things work on the ground. And we're able to see some of the barriers and challenges we're getting in the way of schools and trying to identify, stumbling blocks. So structural and procedural barriers that prevent schools from fully implementing effective reading practices. And then also learn from the Hill that there are tools and structures and routines that can help schools move beyond these barriers. So in this next sort of last part of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these kind of stumbling blocks that are challenges for schools and districts when they're implementing Connecticut's literacy model, which is basically MTSS. And so first I want to start with my solution that I came up with that I think is really great. So here's my solution for these stumbling blocks. So this is I feel like this is really theoretically sound solution, but it feels like there's still some sort of practical bugs to work out here. So, the joke is that if we just added a lot of new hours to the day, we'd have all the time we need to do the work that has to get done. But the reality is that we don't have. We have to work within the constraints of time. And so we have to think about how we do things more systematically, more effectively, and more efficiently. So a lot of these solutions really help schools work smarter, not harder, and really think about tools and strategies and routines and tools to move people beyond these challenges and barriers. So some of these barriers and stumbling blocks relate to, say, literacy leadership. So a school might say something like, we have an MTSS plan, but it doesn't really guide our day-to-day reading practice. So a lot of times we see, right, someone at a school or a district develops a really beautiful reading plan and then no teacher ever sees it. Or how many of you have worked with teams to develop a plan that then sits in a binder or in the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet for the rest of the year, and maybe someone remembers to pull it out at the end of the year, right? So this is sort of the challenge. But some of the solutions is to really have a representative and empowered district and school leadership teams that are committed to regular meetings, consistent routines, and clear communication. And when these district, school, and school leadership teams are working right, they're actively using these literacy plans to guide what's happening day to day. Another solution, and here's just to give an example of the kinds of people that are sitting on these leadership teams. These are the partnerships that are making things work in schools and in districts. Another solution is really that I've learned from the Hill is that developing these activity timelines that document sort of all the school literacy activities and align specifically with the school or the district's literacy plans. And these are things where everything goes on this. Every activity has to be aligned to a specific goal on the plan. Schools pre-populate all the known activities at the beginning of the year and add other activities as they are scheduled or occur. So you can't really see this, but this is, example of an older plan from the first couple months of the school year. This has a date, the activity, the materials, the facilitator, the attendees, and it really includes everything that the school is doing to support literacy. So first, you can see here that there's activities that are related to the leadership team meeting. So there's a retreat in the summer, and then there's monthly leadership team meetings, one in September, one in October. You could also see activities on here that are related to professional development or teacher training. So there's summer training, makeup training, grade level implementation meetings, early release day. So it's really documenting when this kind of professional learning is happening. Then we also see activities that are related to assessment, and those are all built in as well. And another interesting thing that these school activity timelines can be used for is at the end of the year, these are like fidelity forms for how a school is doing with their MTSS. If you get to the end of the year and say, we had literacy leadership team meetings scheduled for every month, but it only happened three months. So, why did that happen? Or, we missed a few months for these kind of activities. What happened there? So it helps document what's happening, but it also helps you reflect back to improve things for the future. Other stumbling blocks or barriers are related to high quality classroom reading instruction. So schools might say, we have identified a common approach to Tier 1, but it doesn't seem like there is consistency in reading instruction across teachers and schools. So some, we've seen districts and schools spend a lot of money buying programs and materials, but then little time or funds on how to implement the program or how to use the materials. So sometimes teachers show up in September to find a giant pile of boxes in the middle of their classroom. And it's even more troubling when these boxes show up in October or November. Also, you can see situations sometimes where the whole school district can name what their Tier 1 approach is, but that each teacher is actually implementing something very different from each other. Right. So a couple of the ways to move past these stumbling blocks is, as a school or as a district, really select and adopt a comprehensive published core reading program aligned with the science of reading and receive program-specific professional development. And this is something that the Connecticut Center is supporting really right now with providing lists of materials and tools that are aligned with the science of reading. Also providing schools with resources and training on how to work to adopt a program that meets the needs of their specific district context, and also helping ensure that districts are getting professional development that's aligned specifically with how to best implement core programs. Another solution is to really think about whole group and small group templates. These are sort of roadmaps that teacher teams, with the support of coaches, come up with to really help you figure out what are the essential non-negotiable components of these core programs that are going to be implemented consistently across teachers. So it kind of works against teachers just picking and choosing the pieces that they want to teach, and more like making decisions as a team, as a partnership, about what are the essential components and outlining that for teachers, and including teachers in that process as well. Using data to inform instruction intervention. So stumbling block could be a school saying, we have useful reading data from our students, but it feels like we are not able to use it to make meaningful instructional decisions for all our students. Oftentimes schools collect really great data, and data systems provide really beautiful reports. Some of these data are shared with teachers and we have meetings, but sometimes, we leave the meetings without really making any decisions, or we just make decisions for a few individual kids. So this picture sort of represents how we're really pretty good at admiring data sometime, but one of the challenges and barriers is actually making decisions using the data. So in the Connecticut literacy model, some of the solutions that we've come up with is structured data team meetings that include a systematic process for reviewing data and documenting instructional decisions throughout the school year. And another is something like data grouping workbooks that really compile all reading assessments and data and specific instructional decisions for each student. These are tools or processes that help take the assessment data and really be able to make decisions about the instructional focus for students, grouping and scheduling decisions, both for Tier 1 and Tier 2, what instructional materials are going to be used, and who are the interventionists that are going to support these plans. existing dashboards don't quite seem to be able to do this. And so through this, and through the support of Hill, this initiative kind of came up with ways to try to make this happen all together. And it's really exciting to see this work, in a sense, like we've seen teachers not leaving the room until all students have a plan. And what this kind of process looks like is eventually coming up with an individualized plan for each student based on universal data and progress monitoring. This is an example of Hill for Literacy has been able to kind of move this beyond the sort of workbooks that people are just doing on their own to a kind of automatized process that they've built into their online tools. Another stumbling block is related to providing small group intervention. So we have students who need intensive small group intervention, but now what? And to me, I think this is the most frustrating thing for us, right? For teachers and for schools, is that we know we have students who need additional support and intervention, but it feels like somehow the structure and the logistics and the schedule feel like an immovable barrier, that we have so many choices that we don't really know kind of how to proceed. Once we know this, I'm only one teacher. How do I do all of this? How do I provide small group instruction? What do all my other students do? When students do get pulled out, how do we do that? How do we group students? Everyone's schedule is different. So one of the solutions is to really focus on a small number of evidence-based interventions aligned across tiers of instruction with program-specific professional development. So this is something you really can't see, but this is a reading intervention inventory from one of the schools we worked with a long time ago. And basically this lists all the intervention programs and materials that school was actively using with kids who are at risk. And the thing about this is this is only page 1, right? So one of the things to make this more efficient is to really focus on a small number of intervention programs that can meet the needs of the highest percentage of kids in the school. And when we really do kind of focus in on a small number of intervention programs, and we can really strategically allocate resources, professional development, coaching, to really doing those programs with high levels of integrity and fidelity, and also making sure that interventionists are experts with that small number of programs. It also provides a lot more consistency and alignment across the school. Another solution is thinking about school-wide block scheduling, which kind of prioritizes reading instruction so that each grade level has a common and consistent time allocated for whole group instruction, small group instruction, and small group supplemental intervention. So school schedules, this is another thing I learned from Darcy. School schedules dictate much of what schools can do. And I don't know if you've encountered this before, but it feels like there's a lot of schools, or a lot of us feel like we can only teach kids to read in the morning. That reading has to happen for everybody first thing in the morning. And that's just the way it has to be. Well, I'll actually let you in on a secret, is that kids can actually learn to read in the afternoon also. And once we kind of break out of that kind of thinking, we really are able to leverage the schedule to help with providing more individualized or small group instruction to students. The other thing around school schedules is that they're often built around lunch and specials, not instruction. So one of the things that we worked on as part of these systems and routines to help schools implement MTSS in the Connecticut literacy model is thinking about maximizing academic schedules. What you see here is a schedule for an elementary school. You could see grades K1, 2, and 3 down the side, and these are different times. And the color blocks are just different subject areas or different things that happened. The green is the core literacy block, and the core literacy block at each grade level is divided into whole group time and small group time. And then the red is focused on reading intervention time at each grade level. So when you think about the opportunities for small group instruction, you can see what that looks like across the school day. So here's the small group instructional time across each of the grades, across each of the days. And here are the intervention block times for each of the grades across the day. So when you think about maximizing adult resources, interventionists, specialists who are going to push in to provide small group instruction in the literacy block or in the intervention block, we can see that we can now maximize the opportunity for them to support small groups. So think of an interventionist, and this is what their day might look like across the school day, right? You can see how these are structured and scheduled in a way where they're happening at different times, so it can really maximize the opportunities for small groups to happen. Okay, so I think I will wrap up there, and just to kind of come back to it, this work is hard. Changing reading outcomes for students is really hard and complex. And because it's so hard and complex, it requires partnerships to really be able to do this work. And it requires partnerships at different levels, right? We need partnerships at the macro level, at the state level, where each of these different partners bring something unique and different to the solution. And hopefully talking about the Connecticut literacy model has helped to sort of demonstrate how that kind of a partnership can work over time, how the focus can change over time. And then also how we need to think about partnerships at the local level, at the school and district level, and that teaching reading, really is mission control. The individual teachers are the key to this, but teachers need the support of systems and structures at the school level, and schools need support and structure from the district level. And to be able to implement these, not just practices, but systems and routines and structures require this kind of collaboration and expertise of these teams and partners at the district level, and that there are, outside supports from the state, from institutes of higher ed, from literacy partners that can really support schools and districts do this work as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coyne.
Am I still here?
You're still here.
Okay.
We're here with you.
It's so strange to do this, like, sitting at home in front of your computer, just kind of talking at your computer. So hopefully, but it's exciting to know that there's other people out there part of this too. Yeah.
Yes, lots of people. Thank you. So would you speak a little bit to how we go about building these types of partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. It's always really hard to build partnerships, but I think hopefully the payoff is worth it. So I think at these kind of larger level statewide partnerships, if I were a State Department of Education, what I would do is I would, try to make connections with local literacy partners. Really know who or the organizations that really understand literacy and reading and reach out to them, and also make partnerships and connect with local colleges and universities. And I would also say that, there's a lot of groups that are available and say that they can support reading. But one of the things I've learned in this project is, you really need organizations that are experts in literacy and reading, that do that work, that's their work, is reading and literacy, because this is really so complex that we need to build as much of that expertise as possible. If as a school district, I would look to see about the kinds of initiatives and opportunities that the state or the State Department of Education is offering. A lot of times there really is capacity and opportunities to take advantage of some of the initiatives that are going on at the state to get involved in these kind of projects and initiatives that are providing support to schools and districts to build these partnerships. And at the university level, we're kind of stuck in our ivory tower sometimes. So for anybody who's a university faculty member, is to, find out what's going on at the State Department, make connections. I feel like the partnership between UCONN and the State Department of Education feels like a natural partnership and has been really rewarding over the years. So I think, I think it's kind of, it starts with sort of reaching out and finding out what's available and who are the organizations or the institutions that can support this kind of work.
Thank you. So how does a school or a district start? How do they start moving towards supporting reading in an MTSS framework?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from what I just said is first, seeing what kind of opportunities are available at the state level, or, opportunities to make connections or partnerships with literacy organizations. And I think, there's lots of ways into MTSS. It feels, overwhelming to be thinking about all of these things that have to be in place. I mean, I think kind of building the partnership at the local level is the first stage. Building a district literacy team or a school literacy leadership team, and kind of taking stock of where you are. There's lots of stages of implementation where sometimes there's some things that are working really well and other things that kind of identifying where those challenges are, where those stumbling blocks are, and kind of, doing a needs assessment or kind of looking internally of like, what are some of the things that we have in place? What are some things that we can leverage? Where are the areas that feels like, we should be investing in trying to move forward. And sometimes that can be done with local capacities. Sometimes it's really helpful to kind of reach out and have someone from, outside the school or district to come in to help with that process.
Sure, thank you. And so in this time of kind of limited resources, starting at that kind of local level, maybe where many schools or districts need to start, are there some steps, some actions that you would recommend that are kind of low resource that schools or districts might take in building their MTSS for reading?
Yeah, I would say, similar to what we were just talking about is, taking stock of what you have, and leveraging the resources that you have and the expertise that you have. A lot of these things, a lot of schools have really strong intervention programs or have materials or have good assessments. And it's less about having to kind of start from scratch, for all of those things. And sometimes it's more about building the systems and the structures and the teaming structures that can kind of help leverage what schools already have, but to make things more efficient. And sometimes making things more efficient is like not adding new stuff, but like stopping some things. So like de-implementation of certain things and additional focus and prioritizing other things. So I think, starting from scratch probably isn't the step for most places. It's, understanding what's working and what we have in place, and then how to move from there.
Thank you. I think that's a great point as we're thinking about our systems and structures, right? What can we stop? What can we take off our plate as we think about adding new things?
Yeah, exactly.
Great. All right. We'd like to shift to some audience Q&A. And so we do have a question. This comes from Nancy. And she asks about the efficacy of an MTSS model and how significant was ensuring that the instruction at each level or each tier was evidence-based. Did we work with locations that were using materials or approaches that aren't as aligned to the science?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this kind of ties back to really doubling down on what we know works. And to me, the science behind all of this is really like increasing our odds. Like we want to kind of maximize the likelihood that what we do is going to work for our students. And I think starting from a place where we all have a common understanding of the science of reading, but also are committed to adopting tools and materials that reflect that. I think the challenge is, there's definitely schools where there's, like interventions may be focus within a kind of certain conceptual or theoretical framework where maybe classroom instruction looks somewhat different. And the challenge for that, I think, is the sort of misalignment between things that are kind of going on in the same school. And especially the students who are most vulnerable, it's just really challenging for students to kind of have to code switch in a way where they're learning through one kind of methodology in the classroom, but then, getting more instruction during intervention in another way. So I think, the consistency at a school level is really important. And I do think, that's where this kind of training in the science of reading or the professional learning opportunities for teachers is, helps understand why certain methods, may not be best for their students. And I think schools and teachers want what's best for their students. And so, having to have kind of hard conversations sometimes, or facilitating, conversations about what we know as a field and how to leverage that to do what's best for students. So yeah, I think the simple answer is yes, there has to be evidence-based approaches at all levels. And, sometimes looking inward at what's happening can kind of come up with answers that maybe what we're doing doesn't have supportive research, and we might need to be thinking about, shifting to some different practices. And those are conversations that we had with schools. Although I don't think, none of those schools were forced into that. It was more working with them so that they could understand, ultimately what they decided was best for their students.
Thank
Steph,
you.
you know a lot about this stuff too. You can jump in too if you wanna address any of these.
Thank you. Well, and I imagine that cohesion too is so important as we think about our students who are receiving special education services. Do you want to speak a little bit to how we think about special education and these MTSS models?
Yeah, one of the really important things about MTSS, and particularly why these local partnerships are so important, is because we're really good in schools of setting up these silos, right? There's the like general education classroom silo, and then there's the sort of reading intervention silo, and then there's the special education silo. So when everyone is part of the same conversation, and special educators are really important, folks who are on school and district leadership teams, that it really should be this continuum of supports for students, and that special education, of course, provides, the legal protections for students with disabilities with an IEP. We know instructionally what students with learning disabilities or dyslexia need is basically similar instruction, but at higher levels of intensity. And so that special education really should be providing that sort of more individualized, highly intensive instruction intervention for those students. But again, that doesn't mean it has to be a different approach or look differently. It's all part of the same. And if students with disabilities, could actually be getting kind of 3 different types of, might be getting one thing in the general classroom, another in a reading intervention group, and another in special education. And, so the kids that need the most consistency and cohesiveness sometimes are getting the most disjointed kind of approach. So I do think that that's one of the examples of why these partnerships and why this kind of consistent school and district level approach is so important.
Thank you.
I'm a special educator, so I'm pretty invested in this. And I also think that special educators have a lot to bring to the larger school-wide conversation about teaching reading.
Thank you. Agreed. Yes, it's a team effort. I'm wondering too a little bit about your work with the integrated MTSS research network, and you mentioned the importance of cohesion across the tiers into special education. Do you want to speak a little bit about the integration of MTSS efforts?
Yeah, I think, we have these, speaking of silos, sometimes we have our siloed MTSS teams, where we have, MTSS teams that might be working on positive behavioral intervention supports or social emotional learning, and then teams that are working on academics. And sometimes there's a reason why they're separate teams, because there's, we don't want to just combine everything. But one of the things that we've been finding in this research is that, there's a real facilitative benefit of thinking about how to support kids' behavior and engagement at the same time as supporting their academics. And one of the study that we've been doing has shown that when we embed explicit support into whole group and small group reading instruction, that helps kids and teaches them how to be engaged, giving them specific feedback about how they're being in group. What we see is, less levels of off-task behavior during reading instruction, and also higher levels of engagement. And we've actually found higher levels of implementation of the reading instruction too. So it feels like a kind of natural connection between engagement. If you're more engaged, you're going to respond more strongly to reading instruction. Also, if you have really good reading instruction that's motivating and kids are successful, that's going to help them with their behavior and engagement and motivation. So it seems like thinking about those together instead of thinking about those separately is a really promising way to think about supporting all kids.
That's really encouraging. Thank you. All right, Dr. Coyne, thank you so much.
Thank you so much to people who attended. Really appreciate you guys coming out. Somebody asked in the questions, if we are recording this, it is recorded, and we will be sending a link to the recording to everyone who registered to it. So even if people weren't able to attend, they will still get the link. If you would like to learn more about Hill for Literacy, you can click the link above the video to visit our website, which is hillforliteracy.org. And if you're an educator who is looking for summer training in the science of reading, we will be announcing our summer open enrollment schedule soon. So stay tuned and please follow us on social media. Thank you again for attending.
Yeah, thanks everybody. It's great to be here.